Chapter 12. Prana. 1. It is a well-known fact today that the cosmic life force surrounds and interpenetrates every condition and every atom, and that the life force can be drawn within our bodies with the breath we breathe. Every act can be according to that life force. Every thought we think can be in harmony with it. 2. Note that it is said that this life force may be drawn in, with the breath we breathe. It is not the mere act of breathing that draws into the body of man this cosmic life force. Unless definite attention to it accompanies our physical breathing, it is not definitely appropriated. It is a life force which is so much finer than our physical air that it is not affected by mere physical processes any more than one might draw electricity into his being by the mere act of physical breathing. Of course, there is a certain amount of electricity, or what we call electricity, that is taken into the system by every act, and, likewise, with the cosmic life force which is sometimes called prana. If you will notice, everything toward which your attention is directed registers an impression on the mind. In turn, this impression is developed into an idea, and the idea expressed in words. This is a sort of mental breathing, is it not? Well, there is an inner attention, a deep longing you call it, to be perfect in every department of your being. When the outer attention is linked with this inner attention, or when it looks always toward the perfection of the universe, as does what Seneca called the eye of the soul, then there is drawn into man's being the elements of the cosmic forces around and about us. The mystics have always taught that attention is the secret of success in dealing with the cosmic forces. Deep, sincere, abiding attention to the surrounding spiritual ethers, a completely relaxed body, and an all-absorbing interest and complete openness of mind are the necessary attitudes in order that one may realize this inner breath, as it is called. This is soul breathing, or letting the self expand into its native ethers, the interpenetrating life force or spiritual ethers, as Steinmetz called it, until through the act of attention it is drawn within the whole being of man. 3. This life force being cosmic must interpenetrate all elements. This is, in reality, the force that stimulates all cellular growth, allows it to expand and become the growth of the body as well as the growth of plants. In fact, it is incorporated with all growth of every description and is the sustaining element of life. It becomes that which imbibes life as well, for, like every other force, it is both positive and negative and acts and reacts within itself, just as whirling currents of air act and react within themselves. One might say that the air breathes, or moves and, at the same time, is acting within itself and upon itself. 4. The method of consciously appropriating the universal cosmic life force, or prana, is commonly called pranayama. One might call it prana breathing, or the practice of consciously breathing the cosmic life force. The exact procedure is difficult to define, and it would take too much time and space to give the entire technique of the pranic breath. The technique for starting the operation is proper breathing, then one may with care and sincerity find his own method for the balance of the process. As we have said above, attention is the one fundamentally important practice in the process, attention to the highest source of energy existing, that all-surrounding presence that you call God. The mind must be without strain, and whatever method best relieves the mind of strain would be the next step in right procedure. In fact, the prana or spiritual substance is so fine and sensitive that it is deflected by the least force. Did you ever try to catch a piece of lint or down floating in the air? Every tense or quick movement to grasp it only drove it away, but a quietness that was like letting it come between your fingers of its own volition was the proper technique for grasping it. That is as nearly an illustration as one could give. It is also like trying to remember something you have forgotten. If you make strong mental effort you do not remember, but, if you let the mind rest, become quietly reflective, then the idea comes quickly within the mind. So with the prana, it is breathed into the nature through quietness and confidence. Every phase of the mind must be free and the body completely relaxed. One must have a sense of complete freedom and complete expansion, as if the cells of the body were actually moving out from each other until they almost stood apart. This practice may be continued until one forgets the sense of physical limitation altogether, then one is in the most perfect state mentally and physically to receive this universal substance into his whole being. It then has access to every cell of his being, it becomes the sustaining and invigorating element of life and especially of the human body. This method of control causes the body to keep young and vibrant. 5. It is a sustaining and invigorating practice that allows the cells and tissues of the body to expand, thereby giving greater oxidation to the body. It is a complete spiritual airing of every cell of the body to the original ethers from which it came. Just as in a ray of light you find the various colors, so in prana do you find all the elements of life, that is the real essence of all the lesser forces. Prana is not oxygen but is that which gives life to the oxygen, the actual life within the oxygen. It is that which gives force to electricity, consciousness to mind. In other words, it is the reality existing within and standing back of the sustaining all lesser forces. It is called the Spirit of God in the scriptures. Pranayama, spiritual breathing, allows the proper expansion of all the elements taken into the body for the body's growth, and, because of this expansion, all the elements are oxidized or aired, as we say when we expose things to the air or sun to become freshened. Just so when the body is relaxed, when the mind and spirit are freed, when the whole nature expands to consciously allow the prana to interpenetrate throughout the entire being, the whole nature is freshened, revived, refreshed, fed. This is pranayama, or the art of spiritual breathing. But, attention is the fundamental secret of the practice. You even have to give attention to the sun in order to gain the greatest benefit from a sun bath. 6. It is through this practice that certain yogi are able to suspend animation for certain periods of time. This rests the whole system and renews it for the contact with its origin or source. It is restored and the original life elements are again contacted by the flesh itself. In the same way and, with the same results, they suspend respiration. It is like coming up out of the water into fresh air after one has been submerged for a period. To try to suspend animation and respiration would only be to drown yourself literally. But, to expand yourself and so relax yourself that you begin to consciously sense the life-giving ethers, makes one so much alive, so vitally filled with life, so refreshed and fed that one has no need of the outer breath or the outer activities of the body. He becomes alive from within. 7. Just as this practice vitalizes the body, so it enlivens the mind. The reason men do not think well is because the mind is too tense, too compressed, so to speak, so that it does not function freely. Under the practice of pranayama the whole nature is expanded and functions more freely and completely. It is like loosening bearings that are too tight on a machine and letting the oil penetrate through it. It then moves more freely. Memory, in this case, comes in from 1,000 different sources and one remembers what he was in the beginning. It comes without any effort at all and anything he wants to know comes instantly and easily into his mind. Inasmuch as prana interpenetrates all, there must be a close relationship between prana and that function of the mind. Prana allows no division in function for it unites all the functions of the individual with the universal. It is, of course, universal and opens the way for all activities, thousands and thousands of activities at the time. Prana is an emanating energy underlying all substance. Of course, substance in its original state is energy and energy is substance. What we know as energy and substance are but two aspects of a single primal energy, and this primal energy is prana, or spirit. 8. We may more truly say that prana is one of the elements of spirit, for spirit is not only energy but intelligence and substance. It is more subtle than ether. The Western world is defining ether as prana, though there is a difference in the subtlety and the activity of prana and ether. The latter is nascent while prana is always active. Ether is prana becoming or coming out toward manifestation. All of the finer forces of nature such as electricity and the other moving elements of creation are divisions and mediums in which and through which prana works. 9. When the human body or any material form disintegrates it goes back into prana, first into the various forms of energy and thence back into universal and primal force. If prana were constantly received into the whole being of man, the flesh would be eternally quickened, or it would become more and more animated, more and more alive, and the last enemy would be overcome. There are those who overcome old age and death with or through an understanding of prana right along. They rebuild the body with the pranic influence. This happens in a slight degree every time one goes to sleep or rests, but, when one adds conscious attention to the pranic presence, completely relaxes in mind and body, the attention breathes the ever-present prana into and through his whole being, therefore, the greatest degree of renewal of mind and body is attained. 10. You see, intelligence is the primal attribute of being and the activity of consciousness as prana, or vital force of creation, and substance is the form through which both act. Intelligence, life, and substance are the trinity of elements in the first cause as defined by the Western world. Intelligence is its knowing aspect. Life is its quickening or vital aspect. Substance is the aspect which has the capacity of form. Prana is usually used as embracing both the substance and life elements, and they are the vehicles or mediums through which intelligence moves to direct and determine the created forms. 11. This primal intelligence, life, and substance are just God Almighty in action, but it must become a conscious fact in every individual. It becomes selective to the individual and is of conscious use to the individual as the individual selects it. 12. The cosmic ray of which Millikan speaks as a pranic wave. They will find 9 divisions of the cosmic ray which are all definitely pranic in origin. They can be of great benefit if properly used. These 9 rays are the emanations of pranic energy, just as the 7 colors are emanations of a ray of pure white light. Creation is only the splitting up and recombining of influences or energies, as we call them, emanating from the pranic ethers. 13. When we go back to the center of anything, it is pure light, and this is the inner light of which Jesus spoke. It is the light of illumination. The greater man's spiritual awakening, the greater the light. Have you not noticed that one awakened in joy has a radiance about his countenance? When one is spiritually awake, the light is correspondingly bright. That is why artists paint Jesus with a halo of light about him. Light is life. This is the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world, and it is the fire through which the initiates of the occult schools had to walk in order to be eligible to illumination. This light is all about us and is an emanation of the pranic ethers. It is the light which is the beginning and the end of creation. When you can live in the light, as you now live in your sense of body, you will be immortal, for the light never dies. I was noticing a report of some kind of light shining in Transjordan, although archaeologists were perfectly sure that there was nothing there of an old civilization. Those following the light found and broke into archaeological remains very quickly. That has happened in Persia as well. We have not yet seen it in the Gobi. There is a history, however, that the light always showed in that country. We have a complete history, in fact, that light showed over the first Tower of Babel, a tower that was built of actual stone in the form of a step pyramid. However, this light is seen only through the single eye, such devoted attention that all the senses and faculties of man are pointed in one direction, and that direction must be toward what the scriptures call the light of his countenance. 14. This is the light of the New Jerusalem spoken of by John in Revelations. John knew well how to use the pranic light. He extended his vision to take in all of it. It is, of course, much beyond what we know as clairvoyance, though clairvoyance is a phase of it and is really a step backward in evolution. It is like living in the borrowed light from another, when the true light, the light that lighteth every man, is within him. 15. We must go forward to that light, and the lower senses which hold us back or away from our birthright will let go. The limited activities direct us away from the unfoldment and use of the pranic light by the higher sense. The psychic faculties will fall into line and become valuable instruments when the pranic light is unfolded. The pranic light vibrates way beyond the psychic forces. Furthermore, mediumship and so-called psychic development are not steps toward the unfoldment of the direct pranic light. 16. Pranic light can always be called upon to overcome any degrading forces that oppose it, just as light can be brought into play to dispel darkness. It can be the I am center. The statement, I am the force of that pranic light and I project it and put it forth as all-powerful, will break that condition of the conflicting forces or voices every time. But it must be the voice of the Christ self, which is the real I am within each individual. This I am is not above you or outside of you, but at the very center of your being. That was Jesus' thought when he said, I have nothing except that which comes in the name and through the power of the Christ. It involves the highest embodiment of prana. 17. The transfiguration of Christ was when the consciousness of Jesus was merged into the realization that intelligence, life, and substance were in the last analysis one, and that one was what he called the Father, or primal cause, like all the various colors of the spectrum returning to a pure ray of white light. 18. There is but one consciousness, one principle, one sense. It is only complicated when we deal too much with differentiations or apparently differing functions and attributes. To deal with the mind as functioning in many faculties is only to further dissipate yourself and draw you further and further away from your source. Behold, our God is one. With that one thought, or attitude, of pranic forces always being in operation within as well as about us, we become unified, or one with the whole. John said that that which is without is really within. He carried it right to that great pranic force which always exists and is always active, and this action is the one action throughout all creation and all space. For the teacher. The foregoing lesson received from Mr. Spalding by the India Tour Party deals with a subject most vital to every student. It reveals the close relationship which exists in the minds of the Hindu scientists of Calcutta University and other Eastern scientists and the religion of the Orient. We are fast approaching the time when walls of difference are to be entirely dissolved and the ultimate union of religion and science will be generally recognized as one and the same thing, though they may often approach a single fact from opposite directions. Paragraph 1. In the matter of successful living, it should be clearly understood that man is not sustained by what he has commonly considered essential. His real supply must necessarily be contained within the movement of forces which operated to create him in the beginning. Within these forces are all the elements out of which the visible creation is formed, and it is only through a conscious contact with these original forces that man may hope to successfully live life to its fullest possibilities. Paragraph 2. The cosmic breath is not a matter of physical breathing, but it is a matter of conscious contact with the life forces that move in the spiritual ethers about us. Breathing is receiving into your nature the elements within the air, and then exhaling what the body does not assimilate. Spiritual breathing is receiving into the consciousness of man that which is within the spiritual ethers, and that is brought about through the quiet and deep attention of the mind. People often relate it to physical breathing, but it should not be confused with this process. Whatever you look upon, you receive impressions concerning it into the consciousness, and everything you do is an expression of what thus impresses you. By attention to the spiritual ethers you draw their elements into your being, and your whole life's expression is quickened and increased because of the very nature of that which occupies your attention. Paragraph 3. One should contemplate the permeating presence of all the forces of being until he becomes as conscious of these forces as he is now conscious of form. This is the secret of developing unlimited power or mastery. Paragraph 4. Pranic breath is not something mystical or difficult and does not require a lot of instruction. One easily and readily absorbs the sunshine, for it is the nature of sunlight to penetrate all objects upon which it shines. More penetrating is the vital energies of the spiritual ethers. Relaxed, quiet attention is the secret. Paragraph 5. Physical tension is a contraction of the flesh caused by mental contractions. Mental contractions are caused by studying the apparent limitations of form and environment. A wider view of life frees the mind, which in turn frees the body. Give your whole being a good pranic airing every day and watch the increase in every capacity of your being. Paragraph 6. Suspended animation is not a matter of merely stopping the processes of bodily functions. It is identifying one's self with a superior action that meets all the requirements of the physical being, then the so-called normal functions are not necessary. The greater always supersedes the lesser and fulfills the needs of the lesser. Do not try to stop eating or breathing or cause the heart to stop. Apply yourself to the divine presence until you find it quickening your entire being. Paragraph 7. Vitality or living energy is not the result of food or breath. It is the activity of the life force of the universe reanimating the being of man. Paragraph 8. Spirit is the activity of the entire creative machinery of the universe, it is God in action. This action involves all the elements within the nature of God and, therefore, contains all the elements involved in creation. Paragraph 9. Death and decay is only a lack of animation from the source of one's being, as is failure and poverty. Paragraphs 10 and 11. The universal cause knows what it is doing, and it knows what you should be doing to fulfill its purposes. Constant attentiveness to all the activities of the spirit is to know and to have the power to do. Paragraphs 12 and 13. Light is life, but there are higher forms of light just as there are higher forms of ether and energy. Only the individual who practices the presence of God can know exactly what that light is like, but one who is given to deep meditation often catches a glimpse of it. Paragraph 14. True clairvoyance, clear vision, is not seeing shapes and forms but is that awareness of mind that sees and knows the pure action of spirit. Paragraph 15. Do not wait to do what you call overcoming before you feel worthy to enter the path that leads to illumination. Go into the light and let it burn away that which is false. Drop your faults, diseases, undesirable conditions. Face the light and these conditions are not. Paragraphs 16 and 17. Pranic light, or spiritual light, is not something difficult to obtain any more than is physical light. It is always moving toward you and works as quickly through your highest ideals or least needs with infinite swiftness just as physical light flashes instantly through any opening large or small. Paragraph 18. Reducing everything to oneness simplifies the entire matter of living and spiritual progress. Chapter 13. The Quantum Theory. 1. Principles of physics are involved in a study of the quantum theory. It is the theory of distribution of energy throughout nature. It was developed in the Berlin University as an outcome of investigation into radiation from black objects. This research resulted in the conclusion that all forms radiate a definite energy and that there is nothing in the world of form that is an inert mass. Every form has within itself some degree of energy, and this energy is a distinct emanation of the energy that fills infinite space. The amount of energy that each particular form radiates is in direct proportion to the relationship which it has with the universal energy. 2. Just as a pendulum swings in a long or short arc according to the amount of force exerted to start it swinging, just so all forms retain the amount of active energy required in sending it forth. This energy is retained by the form just to the degree that it retains its relation to the energy which sent it forth. If the pendulum stops, it is because the impelling force has ceased to exert influence upon it. Matter becomes less and less active as it loses some of its contact with the original impelling force which started it into motion. When this energy ceases to act within the form disintegrates. 3. Metaphysically, this has much of vital importance to those of the Western world. The movement in the United States came under the Depression, and all that means is that there was no foundation in fact. That is, it was founded on only a half-truth. There is fact as a basis for our metaphysics, but that fact was overlooked and misunderstood by most of its exponents in the United States. This will all be discussed in our consideration of the quantum theory. 4. The Eastern world, those of higher thought, have known the facts propounded in the quantum theory. They deal, in brief, with but one fact, that of the universality of all things, and, consequently, in dealing with that one fact they have a definite basis for both science and metaphysics. The psychology of the Western world is mere child's play. It is based to a great extent upon theory. Whenever you deal with divisions of mental, material, and physical, you are bound to base at least 75% of your calculations on theory. Division is not unity and unity is not division, and the basis of all creations is that it is a unit. I am that I am and beside me there is no other, is the eternal declaration of fact which is the unity of all things. The direct violation of this fundamental unity is in considering the mind as having phases or faculties, when, in reality, mind is a single unit, not only as within the individual but as existing in and of the universe. Material form is not something isolated from and independent of the universe but as one in and with the universal substance. The physical body is not an isolated phase of the creative scheme but is in and one with the universal energy. To violate this fundamental unity is to isolate yourself in a hypnotic state where you seem to be a separate being, and, therefore, you cut yourself off, devitalize yourself, and ultimately destroy your ability to further manifest in this plane. To deny the relationship of the visible with the invisible is to push yourself right out of your body and into the invisible. 5. The Eastern philosophy is not based upon theory at all. It is based upon a definite scientific fact or principle. That is the same idea that Einstein is bringing out in the quantum theory. He has brought it out in greater evidence than has any other scientist in the Western world. Many are saying that it is the gap between science or physics and true religious thought. 6. The Easterner does not approach the matter of religious thought as theory at all. In fact, he proves that it is not theory. Thereby, he accomplishes that very fact and the possibilities involved in that fact. You do not see the Eastern philosophers pass out a theory of anything. Their basis is always in fact. It, of course, is not fact simply because they pronounce it so but because it has a scientific basis in fact. That fact was clearly revealed by Christ when he said, "I and my Father are one," preserving the unity of himself with the whole. That is the basis from which all successful living must evolve, and it is only to the degree that this oneness is maintained by the individual that he begins to radiate the energy that sent him into being. This is the basis of the quantum theory as applied from the viewpoint of pure religion or pure metaphysics. And that is why the Eastern philosophers gave so much attention to the quantum theory. They see the scientists of the world returning to the basis of their own religious thought held for thousands of years. 7. Einstein did not come right out and say that it is all spirit. Consequently, it was urged that the physical or material was not a fact, but he showed that it is based upon one joint determination. He put it as one general principle, co-relating all physics, as he said, under one head. That is exactly what those of higher Eastern thought had determined long ago, that there is but one principle, one scientific basis, and that basis one of being. 8. Now the Western world does not go back and reason from that principle. They work through to that principle from the external, consequently it is not necessarily a true form of reasoning, that is, their form of reason is not truly scientific reason. All true reason works out from principle to its manifestation and not from the manifestation back to principle. Imagine trying to work a problem by reasoning back or attempting to reason back to principle by studying the size, shape, form and general construction of an accumulation of figures. The people of the Western world, in their attempt to solve the riddle of life, are doing that very thing. By this process they become highly mental or, as we put it, intellectual. And as we already know, their intellectual knowledge is always subject to revision, for it does not prove itself. That is why one of our modern scientists has said that all written works on science prior to the last 10 years should be burned. The Eastern world is carried beyond the intellectual or the ordinary intellectual. Of course, true principle and reason from the basis of the one fact as the highest form of intellect. But the hypothesis that the Eastern world takes puts it wholly on a true intellectual basis in carrying it to a clear conception. 9. The intellect of the Western world covers a wide range but comes to no absolute conclusion in its hypotheses or theories. All of the science of the Western world has been based upon that hypothesis or theory. The people of the Western world have progressed to the point where they know the existence of certain determining factors, but they never go directly to the simple denominator of one principle when handling fact. The Eastern philosophers have always based their premises upon one natural fact. And there you have the basis of the quantum theory. One universal fact from which all form emanates and operates as the animating force of the created form, the universal distribution of energy. 10. The difference between the Hindu conception and the theory of monism is that the latter eliminated all but the blind force of nature or creation. The Hindu always considered it an active, intelligent force that knew what it was doing, an energetic force, and a force that did accomplish an intelligent creation that moved toward an intelligent purpose, and that anyone who would work with the intelligence of that force could accomplish all things through it. 11. The crux of the whole matter is therefore right knowledge. What we have called knowledge is past. The true knowledge is outside of the senses. The true basis of knowledge is to know the motivating force and the ends toward which it moves, as it is this motivating sense or the inward sense of the trend of the motivating force of the universe that brought all things into existence in the beginning and will bring all things into being through that individual who senses and works in harmony with its purpose. 12. The true knowledge comes through samadhi or silence. It comes through an inner feeling or an intuitive knowing. This is rightly what we call understanding. With all you're getting, get understanding. When we obey what we inwardly feel, the accomplishment is achieved, and then we have correct knowledge, for it is based on the outworking of principle. This is the manner in which all true knowledge comes, not only in things spiritual, but in relation to the principles which we use every day. We discover certain principles, apply those principles, results are forthcoming, and from these results we formulate our knowledge. 13. When you take that knowledge completely out of the realm of hypnosis, you get down to the fundamental fact or truth. Knowledge does not necessarily exist in the fundamental fact. That fact exists prior to and is greater than knowledge. Knowledge, as the Hindu puts it, comes directly from the expression of the fundamental fact. 14. When the Bible says that, "the flesh profiteth nothing," it does not say that the flesh is nothing. It has no reality except that which is of the Spirit which produced it. The flesh is not a producer, it does not produce anything, for it is the thing produced. It is the Spirit which produces. Flesh is spirit in form, as they put it. They do not make any distinction between flesh and spirit or material and spiritual. Consequently, it is all one and the same to them, and that is where they accomplish. The Word made flesh is the true spiritual form. 15. When the Spirit works in manifest form, it obeys a manifestation of law. If you can know that law, you can know Spirit definitely. As Paul says, faith is Spirit substance. It means that faith, made knowing, is all substance. You know instead of having faith. There is where the Sanskrit never deviates. That evidence of Spirit, which is first faith and then knowing, creates. Through that evidence men create always, not through the senses or the sense of the material or physical, but through all substance is Spirit. 16. Faith is the active principle of the mind. The mind acting upon inner knowing or understanding ripens into knowledge or becomes absolute knowledge. Spiritual intuition is direct knowing, it is tapping the infinite consciousness directly at its source. This power of direct knowing is born in every individual. Some manifest it earlier in life, chiefly because they are less hypnotized. That is, the less one is subjected to the supposed knowledge of the race, which is really ignorance, the more readily does that one follow what he instinctively knows and feels to be true. It is within the individual always and must be brought out. 17. Jesus said, "I have nothing save that which comes in the name and through the power of Christ," putting himself in direct receptivity to spiritual intuition at all times. What Jesus did was really a lesson in how each man should proceed in every phase of life. That you might be one with the Father even as he was one with the Father, and his contact was always through the Christ, the Word of God, that is the inner fact of all men. Christ is all and in all, and Christ is the inner reality of each individual. 18. There is only one kind of intuition, just as there is only one kind of physical sight. You can, through your eyes, look toward and discover anything you wish. You may look for beauty and ugliness and you use the same sight. One is desirable and the other is undesirable. You may train your intuition to search out the determining principle and its operations, you can train it into psychic planes and find out what is going on there, or you can train it on your neighbor and discover his secret thought and motives. But, intuition turned in any other direction than to discover the operations of the principle itself is perversion of this sense back of all senses, and hypnosis is the result, for it clouds the clear perception of the individual. The only way to escape any degree of hypnosis is to train the intuition into the channels of direct knowing. This is the path of light, and any perversion of the intuitive sense is the path of darkness. 19. The old theory of occultism that the senses must be destroyed or killed or reversed is not in accordance with the teachings of the pure Hindu philosophy. They say that all is spirit, that the senses are spirit but must be so used and their true spiritual significance preserved. They become avenues of expression of that which the intuition learns as coming from the spirit. This direct knowing is also direct manifestation. If we would accept the fact which is revealed in principle, that fact would become immediately manifest to us. It is just that easy. The Westerner has simply submerged it in complexities. 20. When you rightly understand the nature of what you call matter as pure spirit substance, then you can see just why this is true. The Hindu says, compress the cube and you have a different substance. Expand it and you have a different substance. You do not define this as material or physical substance, as in the compression or expansion you do not change its nature, but only the relative position of the atoms. Water or ice is just as much H2O, regardless of its form, and this power of expansion and contraction is the fourth dimension of it. Likewise, the power of extending anything from one magnitude to another by the simple rearrangement of the atoms is its fourth dimension and does not change its inherent character. If all things are made of spiritual substance, there is no dividing line between what we have called spirit and its manifestation. Only when man is under a state of hypnosis does he imagine that there is something besides the unity of all things and the oneness of all things. Through his state of hypnosis he imposes false influences into form, and these distortions are the fabrications of his own ignorance. For the teacher. Paragraphs 1 and 2. The lesson to be found in this explanation of the quantum theory offers unusual opportunity to impress upon the mind of the individual the fact that all of his lack is due to separating himself from the original first cause. Just as a motor stops when it is disconnected from an electrical current or a light goes out when the switch is turned off, so does man cease to function in just that degree that he separates himself from the Spirit of God. Paragraph 3. When it comes to a matter of merely manipulating the world with thought, trying to demonstrate by the use of affirmation, man sooner or later exhausts the ability to achieve. Only through deep meditation upon the oneness of all things, man's unity with God, is his power revived so that he again returns to the position of power that is rightfully his. Man of himself can do nothing. It is the Spirit that quickens, and, when his mind and nature are reanimated with the Spirit, his words and acts become alive, and then only does he move with power. Paragraphs 4, 5, 6 and 7. It makes a vast difference to man whether he proceeds from a true or from an assumed or false hypothesis. The conclusions at which he arrives in his calculations depend upon the foundation or principle from which he moves. If that foundation is false, the conclusion must be false. As creation began in the great universal whole, man can find no substantial starting point for his own activities except from that same basis. One cannot adapt a principle to his own thought, but he must adapt himself to the movement of principle, and his thoughts must be evolved from that principle. In turn, his action must conform to that same principle, and then, only, can he hope to have results forthcoming that are consistent with his fundamental nature. Paragraphs 8 and 9. These paragraphs involve the difference between true and false reason, between intelligent logic and false logic. We get our minds completely reversed when we work from the external, or when we work merely for external results that we imagine will suit our own idea of things. There is an established order in the universe, and only through aligning ourselves with that natural order of things can we hope for satisfactory results. Paragraph 10. The force which designed and created the universe could not be considered an unintelligent force or blind force moving without conscious direction. Electricity must be governed by intelligence in our everyday affairs, else we could not have light, heat, and power resulting from it. Electricity by itself is a blind force, but, subjected to the control of intelligence, it produces constructive results. So all creative force of the universe must be subjected to the direction of intelligence, else there never could have been an orderly creation. Paragraphs 11, 12 and 13. Right knowledge comes through becoming so still that one feels within himself the movement of universal forces, the Spirit of God. Its activity not only becomes a vitalizing influence, but it awakens an understanding in the mind of man. The inspiration of the Almighty giveth understanding. Just as you must first understand the operation of the principle of mathematics through quiet submission to the rule, so must you contemplate the action of divine principle until you understand its operations. Knowledge is the accumulation of ideas, and true knowledge would be the result of seeing the Spirit of God made manifest. Knowledge comes in the completion of a process. Understanding discerns the way toward results. Paragraph 14. Neither mind nor matter have any power to create or to produce. The power to produce is in mind or spirit. It is the spirit that quickens. Holding thoughts and driving the body only deplete the man. Life is renewed, power awakened through communion with spirit. Paragraphs 15 and 16. Faith is the means through which principle is discerned and applied. First, faith is resting the mind of its own activities to gain new impetus. Secondly, it is relying upon that impetus until it produces results. Faith is a sort of mental transformer whereby unaccomplished things or unmanifest powers are brought to manifestation. Paragraph 17. The secret of Jesus' power was in his complete reliance upon what he felt moving in his deepest nature, and which he called the Father within. The law of God is written in your inward parts, and to outwardly obey what is moving within is to bring the inner capacity into outer manifestation. That which moves in the deepest side of man's nature is the inward action of the universal principle. Paragraph 18. Intuition is only another avenue through which consciousness may be increased. Through intuition one gains the inner facts of life. Trained to the omniscience of God or the all-enfolding intelligence, man can understand anything or any situation from the viewpoint of absolute knowing. Paragraph 19. The outer senses are outlets or avenues through which we express inward knowledge to the outward world. The outer senses should not be condemned or destroyed. In so doing you would destroy your outlets into the world. See to it that the function of your whole being lines up with the innermost tendencies of your nature until you express what you are in the sight of God. Paragraph 20. To know the true nature of all things, not as separated or isolated divisions, but as one and the same thing in different stages of progression, is to be possessed of the power and dominion that belongs to you as a product of one first cause.